If you would have asked me 5 years ago what the on-trend brewing thing would be in 2021, I would have guessed something with the letters I, P, and A. And I would have been wrong. Laugh all you want, but hard seltzer is here to stay. And Imperial Yeast's new seasonal strain W04 Paramount can help brewers get the most out of their water fermentations. A clean and aggressive fermenter, Paramount will produce an excellent seltzer with low fusel alcohols, plus it's gluten-free. If you tried making seltzer with standard ale or lager strains, you know the struggle, and Imperial Yeast is here to help with W04 Paramount. Learn more about this novel strain at imperialyeast.com and pick up your W04 Paramount before it's too late. When people think of lager beer, it's likely the first image that comes to mind is a glass filled with a pale yellow liquid that tastes generally of bready malt with hints of floral and spicy hop character. Indeed, styles like Pilsner and other pale lagers are some of the most popular in the world. But there are other lager styles that offer an even wider range of flavors while being equally as refreshing. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this short and shoddy episode to discuss Munich Dunkel is contributor Cade Jobe.
Yes, the classic Munich Dark. I love this style. It's so tasty, and it's really fun to brew, in my opinion. This style is actually pretty close to my heart. It was one of the first beers that I ever medaled off of in a homebrew competition. Yeah, so I won a gold medal at Dallas Bluebonnet Brew Off with a Munich Dunkel. So yeah, this one's a lot of fun. I really love this beer, and I love this. I love the style. I love how rich and complex it is, and it's just a fun one to brew.
Yeah, I'll just come out and say it right now. Munich Dunkel is probably one of my favorite styles of beer. Overall, I've actually brewed many batches of it over the years. I've won awards for batches that I've brewed as well. And funnily enough, I was actually a fan of Dunkel before I even knew it was a proper style. Well, last year I brewed up a batch where I cut a bunch of corners to see how it would turn out. We'll be getting to those results as well as discussing all things Munich Dunkel in this episode. Well, if you like what we're up to and you want to help us to keep doing it, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in March is a dude who wears a few different brewing hats, Vito DeLucci. In addition to being an accomplished homebrewer of many years with numerous medals to prove it, Vito recently opened Imperial Beer Project in Brentwood, California, and also works behind the scenes at More Beer. Given his experience, this is sure to be an excellent session, and all you have to do to be a part of it is pledge a minimum of $3 per month over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By Friday, March 26th, 2021, we've already had a ton of great guests like John Palmer, Michael Tonsmeyer, Dr. Tom Shellhammer, and so many more. And all past sessions are stored on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. To learn more about how you can be rewarded for supporting what we do here at Brewlosophy, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who have an array of amazing purpose-built stainless brewing products to improve your brew day. If you're looking for a high-quality pilot brewery, make sure to check out the gorgeous BH15 single-tier system, which comes with a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Head over to brewershardware.com to see what they're all about, and make sure to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Adam Ross dropped some feedback on our Facebook post about our recent experience episode, where I had my friends from Crow and Wolf Brewing Company on to talk about their experience going pro. Adam said, "Great show." Thank you, Adam. I have a very similar background. I opened a brew pub called Twin Span Brewing, which is out of Bettenford, Iowa, 9 months ago with zero pro brewing experience. It took 2 years of planning and over $1.5 to $2 million to start. Sounds like we're set up pretty similarly too. 5,000 square foot, 15 barrel brew house, 20 taps on our rail. As the brewer and one of the managing owners, my goal is to keep a diverse selection so nobody feels left out. We're doing well with that so far, and I've been looking at sales numbers to determine what floats to the top to become potential flagships. I can't agree more with the advice that you need a team to start a brewery. If it was up to me to figure out finance, licensing, etc., we would never have opened. I have 2 excellent partners to handle all of that, and a third to manage the kitchen part of the business. Even with their help, the actual brewing and cellar work is maybe a third of what I spend my time on. Don't start a brewery if you just want to brew. And yeah, don't listen to Untapped.
Oh man, so much good information in there, and wow, it can't even. I mean, maybe we should do a Brews Views topic on all of that stuff. Untapped, the amount of time that you do brewing as a brewery owner versus the amount of time you are managing people, having people on your staff that you can trust and count on. Holy moly! But yeah, that episode from Crow and Wolf was fantastic. I wasn't on it, so I can say you guys did a great job. There's so much good information, but all those things, and that key point there, that like 33% of his time is dedicated to brewing and cellaring. I think that is just something that is just so understated for brewery owners, and I have mad respect. Having worked in a brewery, now studying beer science, I have so much respect for people that are able to wear all of those hats and be successful. So yeah, again, fantastic advice in the episode and also in that email.
Yeah, I was, I mentioned it in that episode, and that episode's gotten a lot of traction. A lot of people seem to appreciate the fact that Crow Wolf, Don, and the guys were so open about so many things in their process of opening Crow Wolf Brewing Company. I know that money is just a difficult thing for people to swallow. It's a difficult thing for people to talk about, and nobody who's sitting at home with a brew in a bag set up in their garage who plans on going pro in a year wants to hear, $2 million. But the reality is, if you're going to do it like that, it's not cheap. And so, yeah, what Adam said, having an entire team there so that you're not the only one focusing on every single aspect of that business is going to be essential. I truly, genuinely believe that. Whether you're starting on the nano scale, which is absolutely valid, I think it takes a bit more work, or you're going to go big like Crow Wolf did, have a good team, have good people there to back you up, to take care of the things that maybe you're not perfect at doing. So I think it's really good. And also, screw Untapped, man. I'm not a big fan of them either. I'm sure that the folks behind Untapped are pretty cool. I just can't stand the way people act on that weird form of beer social media. So, well, thank you so much for the feedback, Adam. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. I am often taken aback by how rad our listeners are. In addition to all of the very kind feedback and even constructive criticism that we regularly receive, some go out of their way to actually ship me beer that they think my friends and I are going to enjoy, which is exactly what listener Alec Beeland did a couple months ago. After learning that out here in California, we don't have ample access to all of Allagash Brewing Company's beers, he sent me a couple of cans of their 16 counties, which Allagash says the following about. They say, "There are indeed 16 counties in our state," which is Maine, and it is after these 16 counties of Maine that this beer is named. 16 counties is bright amber in color and offers aromas of clove, sweet malt, and pine. The first sip opens with flavors of bread, malt, and caramel, and finishes clean, dry, and with a lingering hop bitterness. Brewed with a 2-row blend from Buck Farms in Mapleton, Maine, as well as caramel malt, biscuit, and brown malt, we hop this beer with locally grown, freshly harvested, quote, wet Centennial, Cascade, and Mount Hood hops from the hop yard in Gorham, Maine, and Aroostook hops in Westfield, Maine, and ferment it with a Belgian-style pale yeast.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Nice and clear.
This could be.
It's a pretty beer.
Could be a Coors Light.
It might be. Look
No,
at
it's
it.
too dark to be. It should be a Coors Light. Take a sip.
Not a Coors Light.
It could be, dude. It could be.
No.
It's very Pilsnery, and how dare you deny it?
It's weird.
No, it's not. There is no.
Taste it. Go ahead. Do it.
This is a fundamentally flavorless Pilsner. This could be a Coors Light or a Miller Light.
No.
Dude, you're going to look like such an unlearned
Be
fool.
that SMA. It
Okay.
is not.
Throw down. What is it? Throw down.
It's not Miller.
Skin that smoke wagon and see what happens. Throw down, boy.
I'm telling you what it was. It was.
Go ahead, tell me.
It was like a peppery.
Peppery?
That's it.
A peppery.
Peppery.
I'm going to go with a Coors Light, and you're going with it. It's a peppery. It's a light Pilsner. It's a Miller Lite or Coors Light
Well, yeah.
wannabe light Pilsner. And you're a fool if you think it's anything else.
With pepper.
A pepper Pilsner?
There we go.
You're going to be made to look like a fool.
Drink some more.
Dude, pound it and
It's
tell
good.
me it's not like pounding a Coors or Miller Light. It's a Pilsner.
I think you might be right.
I don't think there's any pepper in this. That's a Pilsner, dude.
I'm not disagreeing, but it has that spice of a little
Okay,
spice.
because I love you and we're a team, we're going to go with Pepper Pilsner. I give it a 7. It's Pepper Pilsner.
Yeah, We'll go 5.
I don't know how Jersey thought this was a Miller or Coors Light. It definitely had a noticeable peppery character to it. Man, I gotta be honest. I've always liked Allagash beers. I feel like they do Belgian right. But this 16 Counties beer was so crushably good. I was very thankful that Alex sent me 2 cans of it because I shared the other one with nobody. I just drank the whole thing myself. It was absolutely delicious.
What would your untapped rating be on this beer?
I don't know. Is it out of 5 or is that out of 10? I'd probably rate it a 1 and say it's not a pale ale.
Yeah, it's not a pale ale. Exactly. No, that sounded so good. And I love, it's just so funny to hear Jersey go, oh yeah, this is Coors Light. I'm going to crush the crap out of this. And then Tim go, no, it's got pepper in it. And you're wrong, and have them fight with each other. But no, that sounds good. Allagash makes some fantastic beers. I've had a couple of theirs. Obviously, I've had Allagash White. I loved that beer.
Oh yeah.
I've never had 16 Counties, but it sounds like it's fantastic. So yeah, I mean, not surprised that the guys liked that beer and that you liked the beer.
Yeah, I liked it way more than I thought I would. And it sounds like my experience is kind of similar to Alec. He wrote me a note saying he's a sucker for variety and trying new things. So he says, I almost never buy the same beer twice in a row, but after trying this one, I immediately went back to the store and bought two more 4-packs. It's one of my absolute favorites now. If we had 16 Counties available over here in California, that is definitely a beer that I'd be going to the store and picking up 4-packs of. So if you have access to it and, we share similarities in our preferences for beer, consider picking some up. It was quite delicious. Thanks a lot for sending it in, Alec. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we return from this break, the focus will be on Munich Dunkel. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. Everybody knows what beer is, but I feel like until you really start digging into this tasty beverage, either as a consumer or a brewer, some styles just sort of fly under the radar. That was certainly the case for me when it comes to Munich Dunkel, which these days is without question probably one of my top 10 favorite styles of all time.
Totally one of my top 10 favorite styles too. Munich Dunkel is a fantastic beer. It's got this this nickname, the original brown lager of Bavaria, because it's been around for a really freaking long time. Like different versions of this beer. I think that nickname, original brown lager of Bavaria, is kind of funny because all beers were probably brown at the time that Munich Dunkel was originally brewed. But this one being called the original, I mean, and this is a style that is the granddaddy of granddaddies of styles, or grandmama of grandmamas of styles, if you prefer. But this one's been around for a long time, and it's just a fantastic beer, right? Yeah. I mean, people really love it. There's a reason why it's stuck around for 300 or 400 years, and so I think also the other thing that I like about this beer is it's a really interesting example of how styles come to be, right? Like we see the style guidelines, we see, the ones that are published by the Brewers Association or the BJCP, and Munich Dunkel's in both of them. But how did that, sort of become, how do things become styles? And this one to me is really, really a good example of that. I mean, if you just look, kind of initially at the name, right? Munich, which is a place, and Dunkel, which is dark. It means a dark beer that was brewed in Munich. So, which is, I guess, good news if you live in Munich. All you have to do is brew a dark beer, and you're within the style. But it means so much more than that, right? I mean, this beer isn't just, a dark beer brewed in Munich, even if that's how it originated. It's now, an incredibly popular beer, and I'm sure it was at least one point, I've read this on the internet, I suppose. At least at one point, it was the most popular beer in Bavaria, and for good reason.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of people associate dark beers with, being filling or just too rich and not very refreshing. That just is not the case for me when it comes to Munich Dunkel, along with other darker lager styles. I'll be honest. I think the lager thing is what makes them so refreshing for me. But Munich Dunkel just has the ideal, almost, perfect blend of all of these characteristics that I appreciate in a good beer. It's got the richness from the malt, from the specialty grains. You've got that crispness from the lager yeast. You've got that nice floral spicy thing from the hops. We're going to get into all of that here in a bit, but you put that whole thing together and the gestalt is just this beautiful beer, crystal clear, easy to drink all day long.
Yeah, it actually sort of reminds me. I'll nerd out a little bit here. I used to play World of Warcraft back in the early 2000s, and my character was a dwarf paladin. I played on Storm Reaver, if any of you out there were on there. But the dwarf paladins, you can make them tell jokes, and one of the jokes they tell is, "I like my beer like I like my women, stout and bitter." And then the dwarf women, they also tell a joke, which is along the same lines, and they say, "I like my beer like I like my men, dark and rich." And so that's exactly what I think about whenever I think of Munich Dunkel. I think, it's a dark, rich beer that is just so luscious and so tasty, so crushable. There's a lot of wiggle room that you can play around with, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But it's a really just fantastic German beer style. Like, right? It's got that nice clean crispiness of a lager, but it's got so much malt character too. And you can really, really let that malt character shine, which again, I think is one of the reasons why it was so popular, is it really showcased the malt variety that was popular in Munich, and made this really quenchable beverage that was shipped all around the world for a long period of time.
Not only was it shipped around the world, but it ended up making its way into a curious location. And I commented earlier that this is one of those styles that I loved before I even knew it was really a style. I have a feeling you know where I'm going here, Cade. The Munich Dunkel is what is the style that was ultimately became or that inspired what we know today as a lot of the darker Mexican style beers, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly.
And that would include like Modelo Negro, which is if you don't like that beer, and boy, I don't know who you are. That is such a delicious beer, especially when it's on tap. And then I believe there's a couple other ones. The Dos Equis Amber, I believe, is modeled after that style as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, it's a really fascinating thing that I think a lot of people, at least in America or at least in the United States, aren't really familiar with, is the German influence on Mexican beer.
Yeah.
There's so many of the really classic, Mexican beers that have come out that were really influenced by German immigrants, and this is one. I mean, Germans were moving to Mexico and setting up shop there. New World, just like they were moving to the United States, moving to Mexico, setting up shop, bringing their yeast and their brewing practices, and thankfully, this is one that the Mexicans, looked at and said, "Hey, this is fantastic. We need to brew some more of this," and kept it going. So yeah, it's a cross-cultural style and just a damn good beer.
Oh, it's so good. I love it. And most versions of it, I mean, I've had some pretty gnarly versions of it, but that's, when you're in this world, that's just the case with every style. Most versions of it follow along the same lines in terms of that malt character, in terms of the clean yeast character and the hops and such. Before we break down the ingredient stuff, let's talk a little bit about the style description, maybe kind of what the BJCP says, at least. In terms of appearance, SRM, you're looking at between 14 and 28, which is going to get you, I mean, if you're going 28, you're getting pretty doggone dark. On the lower end of that, the 14 range, you're looking pretty amberish red when you hold it up to a light.
Yeah, exactly. I like to think of those as copper to like dark brown.
Yeah.
And I say dark brown, not black, because I want to see ruby highlights in a really good Munich Dunkel. So that garnet color, like if you shine a light through it, it's got that red tinge on the side. That to me is what I really look for in a color of Munich. Now that red luckily gets to span quite a long color range. You like you said, you can have that sort of amber copper color, to pretty dark. A dark brown, but again, not black, at least whenever, we're talking about BJCP style and kind of my preferences for Munich Dunkel. But the other thing I like to see is that thick head of foam. I really, really like that nice tan foam head that's sort of dense and thick and sticks around a while.
Yeah, I kind of like that on all of my lager beers, but yeah, I mean, obviously with Dunkel, it's the same thing. In terms of aroma, this is probably one of the most captivating things about this style for me. Is it more than anything is a beautiful display of toasty, bready aromatics with very minimal, but perhaps slightly noticeable, noble hop character that's typically going to sway more into in my experience at least, into that kind of balanced, spicy floral thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's got a nice. The malt is the showcase here, right? Malt is the thing that you want to smell and hit you right in the face on a Dunkel. But you've got to have something spicy or floral, those really noble hop varieties to balance it. And you said bready and toasty, and I think that's a fantastic descriptor. Another thing that I always like to get is a little bit of chocolate with it. Sort of that lightly Nutella or, lightly hazelnut kind of character. I really like that. Not roasty. I mean, of course, I don't want any coffee in a Munich Dunkel, but not dark chocolate, but definitely, like milk chocolate, hazelnut chocolate, that kind of stuff. But again, that spicy and floral character from the hops really serves to balance that out. And it just makes this really, really rich, luscious bouquet.
Yeah, I feel like there's an art almost to balancing to getting a beer like a Dunkel dark enough with those, the characteristics that you expect in a Dunkel that you do get from roasted grains, but without it tasting like coffee or, maybe a little bit ashy. And so it really does take understanding recipe development, I think, to get that right. But yeah, I'm with you. A little bit of chocolate, even a little bit of like a toffee-ish thing, not buttery, but obviously, but kind of a toffee caramel thing. Just a little hint of that can really, I think, just bring out that greatness of a nice Munich Dunkel. In terms of the flavor, I feel like it just kind of follows through with, in many ways, it follows through with the aroma, though, given how in a lot of these recipes, you're going to use a large charge of Munich malt. Sometimes I get a very, very, it's an interestingly fruity, but it's not like your typical like citrus fruit type of characteristic I get in the flavor. It's almost like a really dark cherry thing on the finish of your swallowing in that retro nasal experience.
Yeah, I think of like dark plum, like it's got that like really, really, or figgy maybe figgy is a good way to describe it.
Sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's got that, and really the flavors too are, like you said, they match that aroma really well. There may be a little bit more bitterness in the flavor that you can get away with, whereas, I don't want like grassy or citrusy hop notes in the aroma, but I can stand a little bit more bitterness in the flavor. And I think that's really what makes this just so good. I mean, it's got that really luscious, like you said, sort of maybe like light fruity, again, chocolatey, bready, toasty, really malty, just really nice, rounded flavor and mouthfeel.
Yeah, and then you had mentioned a little bit of bitterness. The BJCP lists a range of 18 to 28 IBU. I know that nailing an exact IBU is kind of difficult, I think, for a lot of us these days, based on some lab testing that a lot of us have done. But getting that bitterness such that it balances the sweetness, the kind of inherent sweetness in a beer made with malts like Munich malt and some of the roasted malts that you use in this style, you can get up there. I mean, 28 IBU isn't not bitter, but again, balancing that with the malts that you're using, I feel like, again, just goes to keeping this beer really kind of in check and very enjoyable.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And we've said it a couple of times, and I know a lot of people hate whenever we say this, but balance on this one is it's really important. Mm-hmm. You want to taste the malt, and the malt should be showcased. You don't want it to be overrun by bitterness. I mean, I've had some bad examples, or not bad, but just not as good examples of Munich Dunkel. And those are the ones that generally have a little too much hop character, in my opinion. They've got a little bit too much of, maybe just a little heavy-handed on the late additions of the noble hops or something, or maybe a little bit too bitter, and it just kind of takes away from that really, soft, luscious mouthfeel. And I think that's a really important part of this beer.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the mouthfeel on a beer like this. I tend to prefer all of my lager to be relatively crisp, kind of wash off my palate quickly. That's a part of what I perceive and describe as refreshing. And the nice thing about Munich Dunkel is, given the richness of the malts you're using, it creates this impression of almost a medium-bodied mouthfeel, but it still has that quality of washing off of your palate, which I really love.
Yeah, exactly. You said medium, and I think medium is exactly what BJCP guidelines say, medium to medium full. But to me, it almost feels like full-bodied. I mean, like you take a sip of a Munich Dunkel, and there's like an explosion of malt flavor in your mouth, and then it just kind of like drops away, and it's like it gives way to that nice, clean, crisp lager character. There's the way I use to describe it is just this luscious while it's in your mouth, and then it just sort of, like you said, it just kind of softly drops off, and you're on to the next drink, because you're definitely going to want a second one.
You and I are, for sure.
Yeah.
Just to kind of round out the statistics part of this whole thing, OG range listed by BJCP is 1048 to 1056 OG. And that's, so you got a pretty decent range there in terms of adjusting just how rich you want the beer or how light you want it to be. And then the FG range is between 1010 and 1016 specific gravity points. And then they say that the typical range for ABV is between 4.5% to 5.6%. I know for all of that stuff, not everyone is married to the BJCP as being the Bible of styles. But I do feel like that's pretty legit. That's kind of where I stick to. A lot of the Dunkel that I've made in the past will be somewhere between 1050 and 1052 OG. And then I finish anywhere between, about 1008 and 1012 FG.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'd say I'm at. And then the alcohol, like you said, the range for OG and FG on this beer is a tool that you get to play with, because I think this beer can stand up, depending on what you do with the malts and which malts you use. This beer can stand up well to alcohol content. Now, I'm not talking like, 8 or 9%, but you can get up into the mid 6s, low 7s, and still have a really nice Munich Dunkel, in my opinion. Now, I may be a little bit of a weird, person in that regard, but you can play around a lot with this, and that's why I said at the top of the show, this is a beer that's a lot of fun to brew, because you've got some cool wiggle room, and you really get to play around with flavors whenever you're making this beer.
Well, and one of the neat things about Munich Dunkel is that in terms of the ingredients that you use, this is one of the styles that features one of the more characterful base malts out there. features it really well. And I think most people who make this style are using a fairly large charge of Munich malt in their grist.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be in style, you could use 100% Munich malts if you wanted to.
Right.
I don't know that I've ever tasted a beer that has used 100% Munich malt, but you could certainly, you could certainly do it. I sort of think generally about it as you can kind of use any combination of light and dark Munich and then a Pils to sort of round off where you want that alcohol and original gravity to be. But my recipe for malt grains is like 70% light Munich, so I use a huge charge of light Munich, and then I round it off with another like 29% of Pils malt, and then finish it with Carafa 2. Now that Carafa 2 is not in there for any sort of flavor. It's in there for color. Like that's where I'm going to want to get those ruby highlights from this beer. And that's kind of that's how I sort of base my grain bill on a Munich Dunkel.
So in my experience, I have this weird hang up with using ingredients for just visual stuff. I'll admit, it was part of the reason I struggled to accept New England IPA in the beginning, is because I thought people were doing things just to make it look weird, And so that's the same struggle I have when it comes to styles like Dunkel. I want it to be the color that it is because of the way it was brewed, and for all of the ingredients used to play some role in the perceptible experience, the organoleptic experience of that beer outside of what my eyes see, right? And so this is weird. You brought up both dark and light Munich. I've never used dark Munich in my brewery. I had a buddy of mine make it might have been a Dunkel actually, but it was years ago. He made a beer that had a fairly heavy charge of the stuff, and it just tasted like raw sourdough to me. And it wasn't sour, it wasn't infected, but it just wasn't a characteristic I was a big fan of. So I've kind of shied away from using it. So what I do, a lot of my Munich Dunkel batches from the past have some proportion of light Munich, like you said, and I have made a Dunkel using a heavy charge of Mecca Great Estate Metolius malt. Oh my goodness. That stuff is so incredible for a style like this, in my opinion. I've also used Continental Munich malts as well. Fantastic. I also use Pilsner malt as well. And then I like to dose with either a little bit of Crystal 60 up to Crystal 60 or Crystal 80, only because I feel like that adds an element of sweetness that you can't really get without it. Or if I'm going for the more dry, toasty version of a Munich Dunkel, which I also really love, I'll use a small amount of one of my favorite malts, which is pale chocolate.
Oh, yeah. Pale chocolate's a good one, too. I would argue also that pale chocolate would add a little bit more flavor than like a Carafa 2 adjustment. So that may be a good one, too, if you're looking for, chocolate. It's funny, though, that you said that you don't use dark Munich. That's sort of been my experience with dark Munich is it kind of gives you that same impression as the caramels that you're using. The caramel 60 or caramel 80. That's kind of how dark Munich comes across as me. It's that darker toffee, sort of getting into lightly fruity, not quite fruity, but getting into lightly fruity. And that's kind of where I've seen dark Munich. Now, again, my recipe that I want to gold with doesn't include dark Munich in it. So, use that information for what you will. But again, this is sort of the malt bill here is what I talk about whenever I'm talking about this style and being flexible and having fun playing around with, because there are only a few styles that I think you can kind of just take, let's put a handful of that in there. Let's, use like 75% this and 25% that and blah, blah, blah. And you can kind of just have fun with it, and you're going to make a good beer out of it. That's at least, my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like with Munich Dunkel, the major focus ingredient wise is going to be on your grain bill, because this is a malty style. This is a malt forward style. So, and that's the kind of the reason we focus so much on it. Now, obviously, you got to put hops in this beer. If you're going to make a traditional Munich Dunkel, you're going to go with a noble hop. And my favorite, I've said it a million times, is Tettnanger. I even if you're using just a little bit for bittering, or actually it'd be a fairly large amount, but just for bittering up front, front, I like what it does to beer, even when used in that capacity. And so that's one of my favorites. I've also used Mittelfrüh quite a bit. I've even made a Munich Dunkel with Satz before, and that's very good as well.
Yeah, I'm going to make a quick comment here and a plug for go listening to the Brew Lab podcast. We're going to do a show here in a few weeks on terpenes and like how different hop flavor compounds work. Terpenes are humulene and myrcene. So write those two down, humulene and myrcene. And if you find those two as the primary hop components in your in the hop, I think that hop is going to work for a Munich Dunkel. Those are the primary components. That's spicy and floral components that are in most of the noble hops, like you said, Tettnang, Mittelfrüh, Saaz, Spalt. All of those are going to have primarily those terpenes. So that's what I look for. You can use those sort of what I call tier 2 nobles, which are the nobles that were crossed with something, Perlay, Sapphire, that kind of stuff as well. So I think any of those that have high humulene and myrcene, those are going to be the ones that I like to stick to for Munich Dunkel.
Yeah, and again, this is a style that is not hop forward. So it's not, you can easily get away with also a domestic or an Americanized version of a noble hop. I've actually had quite a few beers that I've made because I ran out of noble hops with what I had on hand that was basically an American analog to some of those noble hops, and it works just fine. You're not getting a ton of hop flavor anyways. And then, I think obviously when you're making any lager, you want to pick a traditional lager yeast. And those strains are vast these days. My favorite that I've used so far, and this one is actually, curiously, is we call it Urkel, or Imperial Yeast calls it Urkel, and I'm a big fan of it. It's an odd yeast because it always seems to take a little bit more time to start off, but there's something that yeast, in my experience, does in a darker wort like a Munich Dunkel that is just so delicious. It kind of contributes to this impression of creaminess that I get in that style, and that's a Pilsner Urquell, sourced from Pilsner Urquell. That's what they say. So that's probably my favorite yeast to use for Dunkel at this point, but I've used so many different strains at this point. I've tried to ferment it with ale yeast. Not a huge fan of that. Not that I got esters or anything. I just like what I get from certain lager yeast better. I've done it with Harvest, one of my favorite yeast all around, and that works really, really great as well.
Yeah, I mean, Harvest was mine. I was actually going to yell it out whenever you were about to say Urkel, because I thought we were going to be the same on that one. I thought we were both going to say Harvest, but no. I've never brewed a Dunkel with Urkel, so that one would be really fantastic. I think that beer, or that style of yeast, definitely has a lot of the good flavor components that would be good in a Dunkel and would really accentuate that malt profile. But for me, Harvest is the go-to for this one for Dunkels. I just love it. It's got that little slightly vanillin aspect of it that I really like, and I think to me that's the one that I go with 9 times out of 10 when I'm brewing a Dunkel.
And the beautiful thing, I've said this a bunch as well, but the beautiful thing about Harvest is you can get that beer flavored beer flavor
exactly
from Harvest. And that's something that I've noticed when using that strain in particular for most lagers that I absolutely love. And when you consider, Negro Modelo and, Amber Dos Equis or whatever it may be, those commercial examples that are more mass market, that can be something that is really appealing to people, to have that recognizable kind of beer flavored beer thing going on in there. And one thing we didn't mention, when it comes to Munich Dunkel, I've actually made quite a few batches with a little bit of flaked maize. And I know other people who like to put in a little bit of, non-grain adjunct, corn, rice, whatever it may be, because their kind of impression of what a good version of Munich Dunkel is those more mass market versions that are brewed in Mexico. And it works out really well in my experience.
Yeah, sure. I don't know that I've ever had one personally, but I could certainly see, like I said earlier, tweaking that alcohol volume. You got a lot of room in a Munich Dunkel. So adding something like those adjuncts, flaked corn and such, can help you dial in where you want your alcohol. That alcohol sweetness is going to contribute to the body and the mouthfeel and everything. Yeah, I could certainly see it. Never done it myself, but I don't see any problems with it.
So you have ample experience brewing Dunkel. Obviously, you won a gold medal, all of that. Let's run through a more traditional, brewing process for this style. We know that with lagers, traditional brewing is taken quite seriously.
So traditionally you should brew with a decoction mash if you're doing a Munich Dark. I've never done a decoction mash, so a single infusion works for me. I don't have any problems with it, but that's kind of what we were looking at whenever we think of traditionally single infusion. Now, that's at, normal mashing temperatures, 152, 154. I've played around with different mashing temperatures on a Munich Dunkel and honestly haven't noticed a difference for whatever reason. So to me, it's just sort of the mashing is kind of easy in that you can kind of do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. And I agree with you. And we've done a lot of experiments on mash temperature that seems to suggest that whatever long chain dextrins are left over in wort, if you mash really warm, it doesn't seem to be very perceptible, but you will notice a difference in the alcohol level, even if it's after drinking 4 or 5 pints of this delicious type of beer. So be careful with that. But I'm with you. I like to, traditionally like to mash somewhere around the 152 Fahrenheit or 68 Celsius range. In terms of water profile, one of my little tricks for making sure that the beer maintains that refreshing drinkability while also having that nice medium mouthfeel is to use more gypsum than I do calcium chloride. I want a higher sulfate to chloride ratio to create that impression. It doesn't thin the beer out necessarily, but to me, it makes it more poppy and refreshing in a way. It doesn't leave a coating in my mouth, but I still feel like the beer is rich and has that nice, nice mouthfeel that we're after with this style.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm sort of slightly tilted toward chloride versus sulfite, but I'd prefer the two be pretty close to the same. Maybe like a 1 1/4 to 1 versus like just slightly more chloride than sulfate. But interestingly about water, Munich water, if you look at the water reports, was pretty hard. And that generally benefited darker styles, like a Munich Dunkel. So if you've got hard water, this is also a good beer for you to brew. That's what I was brewing with whenever I won the gold with my Munich Dunkel, and I think that really comes out well. Also, I'd say for if you're using water profiles on like Brew and Water or Beersmith or something like that, or Brewfather, any of those, amber or brown balanced is the profile that I use.
Yeah, a lot of the people that I've talked to over the years, my local kind of brewing clique here in Fresno, we kind of went through a Munich Dunkel phase that for some of us never went away. And when we would talk about water profile, I feel like the majority of those guys were really into more of a balanced profile like you. And for most of my beers, I'm a big fan of I'm the one drinking most of my beer, so I'm going to do what works the best for me. And I've just found fairly consistently that a bit more sulfate to chloride is what suits my palate. So that's the only reason I stick with that. I do think traditionally, though, you're looking at more of a balanced sulfate to chloride ratio. And as long as your calcium is up above 50 ppm, I know some people who like to push it up to about 150 ppm. I think you're going to be set. Just make sure that ratio is in check. Because of the fact that the grist for this does include, it can include a fairly hefty portion of Pilsner malt. It was fairly traditional. Again, decoction mashing, which means you're pulling some of that mash out, you're boiling it, adding it back into the mash, 1, 2, 3, 15 times, however many people think is best. And then when you go on to boil it, I think it was very common when I started making lagers in general, including Munich Dunkel, to boil for a minimum of 90 minutes.
Yeah, I always heard this was the style that you had to brew, that you had to boil 90 minutes for. Those Maillard products and the melanoidin activity and stuff. I'll caveat my response to this. The beer that I got a gold with, I did boil for 90 minutes, but I haven't done it since, and I don't think I've noticed a distinction with the malt. One thing that I did do, and I didn't bring this up in the malt, is I do occasionally use like a charge of melanoidin malt or Victory or something like that, and that'll give you that character and let you reduce the boil time down from 90 minutes to 45 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and melanoidin malt just being kind of a stand-in for people who don't want to do the work of a decoction mash, right? I mean, that's
yeah, exactly. Like me.
Yeah. Yeah, like a lot of us these days, I think. Single infusion is my approach as well. I've done batch sparge, no sparge, brew in a bag. I've brewed so many Munich Dunkel in my day. Once that boil is complete, you've added all your hops. It's typical, and I think for most styles, even outside of lager, you want to get that wort chilled as fast as possible. Now, this is a lager style, so you're going to be fermenting it, probably around, if not a little bit cooler than 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. So in order to get that wort as cold as possible, as quickly as possible, it may, especially for home brewers, it may require you to take that fermentation vessel, put it in your chamber, or run glycol through that wort until it drops down to that really nice, cool fermentation temperature.
Yeah, I want a good cold break on this, and I think that's an important one for this beer because I think depending on the malts that you use especially, you can get some clarity issues if you don't chill that beer down pretty quickly. That doesn't mean that you have to get it all the way down to 50. You just need a really rapid chill from, boiling down to, sub 100, sub 90 or so. Get a really nice cold break. So that's important to me.
Yeah. And that, a lot of people out there still really heartily believe that clear wort leads to clear beer. I'm not sold on that anymore these days after all of the experiences that I've had that call that into question. But I think traditionally, there are people out there who, when they're making any sort of German lager, will, get that cold break, chill that wort down, let all that cold break fall out, let that trub, settle at the bottom of whatever vessel it's in. Then they rack that wort off into another vessel and let it settle out one more time before racking it into the fermentation vessel. Again, people take their lagers very seriously. I appreciate it. I don't necessarily do all of that, even when I was brewing more traditionally. Then you pitch your yeast. You want to pitch a big ol' amount of yeast to make sure that you got enough in there to do the job you're expecting it to do. You don't want big, long lag times where contaminants can take over or anything like that. Let the beer ferment. And this is another one. It's a lager. So you're letting this ferment cool for, 2 to 3 weeks. Some people, these days like to kind of ramp that temperature up for a de-rest. Probably don't want to go too much higher than about 62 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like 16 degrees C or so. Let that diacetyl rest finish out. You want to make sure to drive off any of that unwanted off flavors. And then you're going to crash that beer down, make sure it's nice and cold. You don't want any oxygen coming into contact with it. But this is one of those styles that I absolutely... I won't serve mine unless it's, near bright in terms of clarity.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier on the appearance that those ruby and garnet notes, right? That's what I want to see in the appearance. And it's my experience that those aren't as breathtaking, I guess, if the beer is less than clear, right? It's like the sparkle, like I don't know, Dorothy's ruby red slippers, the sparkle. It's just like the beer, shines a little bit whenever it's clear and you get to see those ruby notes. If the beer is even just a slightly bit hazy, I feel like you lose a little bit of that refraction in there. Yeah. And so to me, again, using finings, doing a good cold crash, those are all things that I do whenever I'm making a Munich Dunkel, because again, those are things that I want to see.
Well, yeah, and one way that I think the traditionalists, ensure clarity of their Munich Dunkel is they let it lager. It's a lager style, so they're letting it lager for upwards of 6+ weeks, depending on the OG of the wort before they pitch the yeast. So that is obviously going to allow a lot of that sediment to drop out to the bottom, that precipitance, and result in a clear beer. And then once that beer is ready, you want to package it. I know some people who do also lager in the package, so in their keg or their bottle. You can bottle condition this style, you can keg it, and I like personally to have mine somewhere around 2.5 to 2.6 volumes of CO2. Again, I want it to be nice and refreshing, and for me, that means well carbonated.
Yeah, I like well carbonated. Now, I do want to say something about carbonation. This is a European style. So to me, it doesn't need that 2.7 or 2.8, 2.9, American carbonation level. 2.5 volumes is plenty of carbonation, in my opinion, in this beer. If it's a little over carbonated, fine. I'm not gonna complain about it. I'll still drink it. But this one to me is one of those that if it's a little bit under carbonated, I kind of like that a little bit. It kind of helps that luscious mouthfeel that I'm looking for. And but you know, the carbonation to me is more about the foam on this beer. I want that nice head of foam on this beer, and I think that's one of the things that really helps dial it in, is having that carbonation at the right spot.
I agree with you. So that is kind of more of the good way, the traditional way of brewing a Munich Dunkel. Cade, do you have any favorite commercial examples of Munich Dunkel that you can share with the listeners?
Yeah. So, Hacker Shores, Munich Dunkel, that they, I think I said that right. I'm not sure if I said that right.
That's how I say it. So
yeah. But like whenever I was, studying for the Cicerone exam, I actually went to, Total Wine, and bought individual bottles of 8 different versions of Munich Dunkel, American, produced and German. And the German versions of Munich Dunkel were, in my opinion, far and away better than the American versions that I tried. Now, that's not to say that all of the American versions are bad, but man, the Munich breweries that make Dunkel, I don't know if it's just because they've been doing it for a long time, but those were really good. Those are my commercial style. Those are the commercial examples that I really like of Munich Dunkel.
I'm right there with you, and that was the case for me for so long. I'll never forget my friend Sean sharing this bottle of I wish I could remember, but it was a bottle of German-made Munich Dunkel, from a bigger commercial brewery over in Bavaria, and the experience of smelling what to me smelled like crusty, toasted bread, and then just drinking this incredibly rich but not cloying, delicious beer. It was phenomenal. And the only beer that I've had so far, the only Munich Dunkel that I've had so far that comes close to that is an American made one. It's by a relatively small, though I think fairly well-known brewery out of Bellingham, Washington, called Chuckanut. And they have a Dunkel lager that is absolutely to die for. I've had far too many. My wife can tell you, when the times that I go up and visit in Bellingham, Chuckanut's always a long stop for us. And there was one time where I just had so many. Yeah, I don't remember leaving the brewery, but it's so delicious. And Munich Dunkel is obviously one of those styles I think is very approachable for a lot of people, even those who say they don't like darker beers. And there's a reason for it. It's been around for a long time, and a lot of us love it. Well, having made numerous batches of Munich Dunkel using generally traditional methods, I began to wonder what would happen if I cut a bunch of corners to reduce the overall grain to glass time and brewed one up short and shoddy style. More on that when we return from this break. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. For most of the batches of Munich Dunkel I've made over the years, I stuck to largely traditional methods. 60 to 90 minute mash rest to encourage full conversion, 90 minute boils to reduce the risk of DMS, and cool fermentation temperatures to ensure a clean profile. That was not the case for a recent batch that I made using short and shoddy methods. I'm using a full volume brew in a bag system these days. It's a SS Brewtech 1V electric system. And so that's what I did with this one. I believe it was a Monday. I started at 10:39 in the morning by collecting the full volume of filtered water, which I added an unmeasured amount of gypsum to before turning the element on to heat that water up. Now, again, I'm a fan of a higher sulfate to chloride ratio, and based on the water that I have here at my house, which I've had tested, I added maybe 2 to 3 teaspoons of gypsum, no calcium chloride. My goal there being to accentuate that crispness of the beer.
Yeah, exactly. I think you talked about this in the prior, the gypsum there. I wonder also how much it has to do with your water profile. The fact that you like it that way. It could be. I mean, that's a perfect use for gypsum, is to make beers more crisp. But yeah, everything so far sounds like a fantastic Munich.
I mean, even though I didn't measure out, people comment on that. I'm like, dude, it's short and shoddy. That's what we do.
Yeah.
I then, weighed out and milled all of the grains, which included 63% Metolius Munich style malt. That's from Mecca Grade Estate, and then 35% of Mecca Grade's Pelton Pilsner malt, and 2% roasted barley. The only reason I went with roasted barley over pale chocolate was because at the time, I was all out of pale chocolate. And, this is one of those things. What I love about this series is going out there with a style in mind, looking at what I've got on the shelves and saying, all right, we can make this work. So again, you got 63% Metolius Munich malt, 35% Pelton Pilsner malt, 2% roasted barley. My goal with the roasted barley in this one, by the way, to go against what I had said earlier, was I wanted to make sure this beer was dark enough to fit within the style range. It's the only reason I used it. I didn't expect anything from the roasted barley other than a color contribution at that rate. So
I was going to make you admit that on air if you didn't. So I'm glad you beat me to that, because otherwise I can't imagine 4 ounces of roasted barley having any other purpose other than.
There was only 2 ounces, man.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
2
ounces of roasted barley having any other purpose other than color. So
that was all it was there for, admittedly. But again, I can do weird things. I can go out of my comfort zone because I call it, short and shoddy. So, well, when the water was to strike temperature, I dropped the bag of grains into it and stirred it to incorporate before checking to ensure I hit my target mash temperature, which was 152 degrees Fahrenheit or 68 degrees Celsius. Pretty standard, as we discussed earlier.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. For being short and shoddy, you're doing a lot of things right so far for Munich Dunkel.
Well, just you wait, Cade. Once I dropped those bags in, I set a timer for just 30 minutes instead of my typical. When I would make lagers back in the day, when I first started making them, I would mash them for 90 minutes because I had been told that encourages, one, more conversion, but also a crisper mouthfeel. I don't understand the logic behind whoever told me that, but on this one, I did 30-minute mash rest and stirred the grains every time I walked by the kettle, which was probably 3 or 4 times throughout that half an hour mash rest. Pulled the bags out when the timer was going off, let those grains drip while the wort was heating up. I even gave the bag a nice squeeze, until I reached my pre-boil gravity. I then proceeded to boil that wort for just 25 minutes. Just 25 minutes instead of 90 minutes. So if any DMS is going to be in this beer, this is the culprit. This is why. During that 25-minute boil, I added 30 grams of Mount Hood hops at the start of the boil. So they were in the wort for the entire 25 minutes. And then I added another 30 grams of Mount Hood hops with 15 minutes left in the boil. I'm curious, Cade, what you think about my use of Mount Hood there instead of a more traditional noble hop, which, by the way, I did have on hand at the time.
See, so you did it just to mess with us.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know about Mount Hood in a Dunkel. Mount Hood's a good hop. I guess maybe some of that piney character can substitute for the for the spicy sort of floral noble hop aromas. But yeah, that wouldn't have been my choice, especially if you had noble hops on hand. So I'm interested to see. I want to know what the tasters came out with on the hop questions on this one.
Well, so the reason I went with Mount Hood, it was the first hop that I ever used in brewing. It came with my Irish Red Ale kit that I got way back in 2003. And in my research of that specific variety, I learned that it's actually a cultivar of Hallertau Mittelfrüh, which is a variety that I've used many times in many different types of lager that I absolutely love. So I too was excited to see how Mount Hood would play out. Now, of course, Mount Hood is grown it's given its name, is grown in the Pacific Northwest traditionally. And so it may have taken on some of those characteristics we're more familiar with over here in the United States. So when the boil was complete, I chilled the wort down to a balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees C with my immersion chiller, which was as cool as I could get it at the time. And that's typically about as cool as I can get my wort most times of the year. And so a refractometer reading at this point showed that the wort was at 1055 OG, a little bit on the higher end of the range there based on the BJCP, which I'm absolutely not complaining about. When I designed these short and shoddy recipes, I typically do so with an efficiency, a brewhouse efficiency of about 60%. And on this one, I ended up hitting 63%, which explains that little bit higher OG than I was expecting. Not too bad though. I was pretty stoked with this.
Yeah, 1055 is a perfect OG for that. I think the last time I brewed a Munich, I was at 1049 or 1050, which again is sort of on that high end. 1055 is going to be just fine as long as you've got the balance good in the finished beer. But that's still incredible that you hit that number with only 63% efficiency.
Yeah, well, I hit that number with a 30-minute mash and a 25-minute boil. So again, I'd been doing these short and shotties for a while. I know my routine in my system, so that may have helped out a bit. But I then racked that wort into a sanitized Flex Plus fermentation vessel, and then direct pitched a single pouch of Imperial Yeast L13 Global into this batch of wort. And remember, it was still at 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 C at this point. This is a huge no-no in the world of traditional lager brewing. You have to get that wort all the way down to at least a couple degrees Fahrenheit below your intended fermentation temperature, no?
Yeah, of course, and especially with a yeast like Global, that's one of the ones that I've heard. If you get that one at those higher temperatures, you're going to produce a lot of esters and phenols with it. But I guess we'll see if that happened.
Global, just for those who are curious, Global is Imperial Yeast's version of, or so it's been told, of the Weihenstephan lager strain, the most popular lager strain in the world, as they say. The filled fermentation vessel was then placed in my temperature-controlled fermentation chamber and set to 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19 degrees Celsius, my preferred lager fermentation temperature when doing short and shoddy batches. And then I attached my CO2 capture device because I feel like one of the shortest things that you can do in a short and shoddy brew day is reuse carbon dioxide that you create during fermentation for good. So yeah, I fermented this one at 66 degrees Fahrenheit. Cade, what you think about that, man?
Yeah, 66. I mean, again, for Global, I mean, that would maybe a little high for me, but I'm one of those guys that I'm not really concerned about fermenting most lager strains at those sort of ale temperatures, 65 or 66. I mean, when I'm fermenting Harvest, I'm down at like 60, which isn't that big of a difference. But, I mean, I think it's certainly outside of the norm, right? Most people wouldn't ferment Global at 66 or pitch it at 70. So, yeah, I think you're well within the short and shoddy frame of the experiment here.
Oh yeah, this is one of those things that's liable to get you, outcasted from any lager brewing Facebook group if you talk about fermenting them this warm. So, but again, it's all a part of this fun process that we created. So the time at this point was 12:41 p.m. for a total brew day time of 2 hours and 2 minutes. When you calculate in the 15 minutes it takes me to clean up, I'm still under 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is pretty impressive in my opinion. I think I spent the rest of the day hanging out with my kids, so I'm not complaining about that either. Fermentation activity was noticed later that evening, thanks to imperial yeast. I mean, that's always the case with the fresh yeast that we're getting. And then it proceeded actively for the following few days. Now, with observable activity completely absent after 9 days in the fermentation chamber, I took a hydrometer measurement showing that the beer finished at 1011 FG, which is just perfect in my opinion for this style. And that resulted in a beer that had 5.8% ABV. Now, I did, during that 9-day period, I think 2 days before I took the hydrometer measurement, I bumped the temperature up from 66 to 70 F, which is, I believe, 21 C, just to encourage complete attenuation. I didn't want to leave any residual sugars or anything like that behind. So at this point, I disconnected the fermenter from the now purged keg that it was attached to, and I attached CO2 from a canister so as to reduce suck back while cold crashing, and then I set the temperature in the chamber to 33 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. For cold crashing, the following day, I pressure transferred the beer to that naturally purged keg, which was then burst carbonated overnight in my keezer before I reduced the gas to serving pressure. My typical burst carbonation approach is to hit it with 50 PSI for 12 to 13 hours, and then dropping the gas down to my preferred serving pressure of 14 PSI. Again, that's based on my kegerator. So that'll be different for everybody depending on your line length and such. And then after a week of conditioning, or lagering if you want to call it that, in my keezer, I began serving the beer to tasters for evaluation. So interesting brew overall. We're at about 2 weeks, give or take a few days, grain to glass.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're ready to talk about the photos yet, but damn, that is a good-looking beer.
One of the weird things I believe, I have to double check this, but I believe I find this one with gelatin. And one of the interesting things that I've noticed about a lot of the short and shoddy batches that I've done is that even when you find them with gelatin, there's this weird thing where they just don't drop as clear is beers that are brewed more traditionally with a 60-minute mash, 60-minute boil and such. And I just can't put my finger on what that is, and like why it wouldn't drop as clear as other beers. Yes, I did find this one with gelatin. Regardless, this one came out looking absolutely beautiful. It looks, I mean, I'm looking at the picture now as well, and it looks bright to me.
Yeah, it's got those ruby notes that we're talking about. Nice thick tan foam. I mean, it looks really, really nice as a good example of a Munich Dunkel.
Well, I did serve this one to blind tasters, but just to say up front, I really enjoyed this beer. I was not quite sure what to expect because my biggest concern at this point was that grain bill, that roasted barley, and lacking the lack of pale chocolate, which is kind of a go-to for me in this style. So I was just concerned maybe it was going to taste a little bit too sweet because of that high punch of Mecca grade Metolius malt. I didn't get any of that. It was really, really nice. Instead of that cherry thing that I get from continental Munich malts, I get this, I've said it before, I get this like toasted graham cracker flavor from the Mecca grade Metolius Munich malt. And I absolutely love it. It works so well in all of the beers that I've made where you would normally use a standard Munich malt. This craft malt is just so phenomenal in the character that imparts to beer, man.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity now to brew with Pelton from Mecca Grade, and I love that. I love that beer. I'm really excited to get to do some of the Munichs, the Metolius that they do. And I really like the characterful malts for this beer, right? I mean, you can use Pilsner, you can use continental malts, as well, like Weyermann's and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And they make a fantastic Munich Dunkel, but I really do like the subtle character flavor differences that the craft maltsters really provide to Munich Dunkel. I think that's really good.
Yeah, it's also a dose of uniqueness. I mean, there's something cool about being able to make a beer that isn't like everything else that's out there, you know? So that's one of the things that I've benefited from. Now, just to say out front, I didn't pick up any off flavors in this beer. I didn't get any DMS. I didn't get any diacetyl. I didn't get any acetaldehyde, anything like that. It was just really a good, clean Munich Dunkel that tasted like a Munich Dunkel. I didn't get any esters or phenols from the warm fermentation temperature using that traditional lager yeast. So to me, biased as I was, it was pretty good. But what did the tasters think? Well, I served this one to 11 tasters. Now, the data collection for this one was pretty close to around the time that the pandemic kicked in, which is why I only got 11 participants for it. But still, 11 is better than 0. And so the first question we ask is we have them rate average characteristic rating. So we ask them to rate the pungency, basically, of hoppy, malty, and dry characteristics or kind of fermentation characteristics in the beer, just to see what they're picking up as being the strongest and the weakest. And in this one, tasters seem to perceive the strongest characteristic as being the beer's dryness, which was followed very closely by its maltiness, both of which yielded average ratings of about 3.3 and 3.1 respectively. In terms of hop character, taster ratings averaged around 1.4 out of 5. So to me, that is exactly what I was looking for in this beer. I wanted it to be nice and dry, still having that rich mouthfeel, but the malt character to really be way stronger than the hoppy character.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Malt character much stronger than the hoppy character. Interesting, too, that dry sort of attenuated. I wonder how much that little bit of gypsum that you put in contributed to that sort of dry attenuating character. I also sort of wonder if that's a place where tasters will put clean, if it's just like nice and clean and refreshing, they might just, check off dry or something.
Yeah.
I know there's different questions for that, but
yeah, I'm with you though. I do think it's the what gypsum contributed to this beer, and again I do it intentionally, but it had that really clean, washes out of your mouth, doesn't linger for too long, yet still was very rich flavored and just really nice and luscious, like you were saying. I do think that higher sulfate though is going to create the impression of dryness. We know that a beer that finishes at 10:06 isn't going to be perceptibly different than one that finishes at 10:11 like this one did. But 10:11 isn't what most brewers would say is a very dry beer, but that impression of dryness was there, which I think is fun. It's one of those levers that we have to play with in water chemistry. In terms of when we break down the different characteristics of each of these various things, hops, malts, yeast, stuff like that. In terms of hop character, 5 out of the 11 tasters rated earthy hop character as being number 1, and then 2 out of the 11 said that they noted a spicier hop character, and then one person each endorsed fruity, pine resinous, floral, and melon. The earthy thing is a weird one to me. I've said this before. I'm not sure that was the hop character they were getting as much as it was the kind of like wet hay thing that I get from Pelton malt. It's very, very nice. In fact, it's so good that I've got local commercial brewer Crow and Wolf here is using only Pelton malt as their Kolsch grain. It's very nice, but I could see how people might mistake that for earthy hop character.
Yeah, and I've got to eat crow a little bit here too. So I looked up Mount Hood hops while we were talking about this, and I said in the earlier segment, myrcene and humulene are the 2 oils that you want to look for. Yeah, those are the ones that Mount Hood has the most of. So maybe you did get a good hop choice out of this, and I learned something new today that I didn't know before. Yeah, that earthy character to me, that sort of describes. I can see that as a noble aroma, right? Especially when combined with some of those craft malts like Pelton. I definitely know what you're talking about. That sort of wet hay is an interesting descriptor. But it's just like a more characterful malt to me. And I think that's kind of where you see spicy and earthy as the 2 ones that got the most. And I kind of like those descriptors for noble hops. I feel like that's the way that it plays with the Pelton and the Mount Hood having those high terpenes in it. I mean, those doesn't sound crazy, and it certainly doesn't sound out of style.
Well, yeah, and considering how low tasters rated hoppiness overall, the fact that they would rate earthy, and that kind of contributes to my presumption that maybe they're picking up something other than hop character when rating that, because there just really wasn't that much hop character anyway. So in terms of malt character, 3 out of the 11 folks who tasted the beer rated it as nutty, and that is an absolute win for me. 2 out of the 11, or 2 people each, felt it was cracker, bread crust, toasty, caramel sweet, and then roast. And I'm not sure who tasted it as being roasty, but the fact that so many people indicated cracker bread crust, nutty, toasty, caramel sweet, all of that to me, what that says is that it had all of those characteristics on some level, and what people perceived may have been different, but that is pretty much smack where you want, in my opinion, where you want a Munich Dunkel to be in terms of malt character.
That's fantastic for Munich malt. I mean, those are the descriptors I think that we used in the prior segment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to describe an ideal Munich malt, and you just hit all of them. So yeah, I think I think the malt characteristics certainly look like they turned out like a great example of a Munich Dunkel.
Yep. And then I think as you might expect, as you might not expect, considering how warm I fermented this beer, 8 out of the 11 participants endorsed clean fermentation character. I'm going to say that again. 8 out of 11 thought it was clean. They didn't pick up any esters or phenols or anything that you would presume would happen by fermenting such a style at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or 19C with a traditional lager strain. 2 did endorse esters and 1 thought it was phenolic. I did speak to one of the people after the fact who said that they endorsed esters, and what it sounds like they were picking up, again, was more of that real subtle fruitiness that you can get from higher or from beers that are made with a higher charge of Munich malt. I didn't pick it up, so I can't relate with it, but I thought that was interesting. I didn't get any spicy phenols or anything like that from this beer, so that one person either is very, very sensitive or fat-fingered that one. I'm not sure. In terms of off flavor, not a single person identified any off flavors in this beer. Again, that's a win for me. There was no DMS. There were no estery off flavors, fruity off flavors, contaminants, anything like that noted by any of these tasters or myself. A couple of my favorite questions on this survey. One of them, we asked tasters to rate on a scale of 0 to 5 how closely this version of, and they don't know that it's how it's brewed, but how closely this version of a Munich Dunkel is to the BJCP description of it, the impression that BJCP writes out, as well as other versions of Munich Dunkel that they've had. 0 out of 11 rated it a 5 out of 5. All right, cool. We try to stay away from the highest ratings. 9 out of 11 gave it a rating of a 4 out of 5, which I think is pretty doggone good. Another 1 gave it a 3 out of 5, and then 1 rated it a 2 out of 5, which was the lowest rating. So kind of a decent spread there, but the huge majority thinking that it was pretty close to spot on with the style.
Yeah, that's fantastic. 9 out of 11 thought that it was at least a 4. Yeah. It sounds like you nailed it there. I can see why this was your favorite question for this experiment, because it sounds like you got it right.
Well, and we had a few people when we were building this survey, when we first started doing the Short and Shoddy series. We made some changes over time. One of the biggest ones being that we now let the tasters know, what style it is that they're tasting ahead of time, and that's what we did on this one. But a lot of people were saying, well, that the represent style is no different than how much do you like this beer? And I thought, well, I don't think that's true. And so now we've got how well does it represent the style? And then how much do you just enjoy drinking this beer? And on that one, 5 out of the 11 folks rated it a 5 out of 5. So almost half, just under half of the people really, really enjoyed drinking this beer. Another 5 rated it a 4 out of 5. So right there, you've got 5 out of 11 people rating their preference as being a 4 out of 5 or higher. And then that final person rated it a 3 out of 5. So there was nothing lower than that. No 0s, 1s, or 2s. I don't get, kicks off of people telling me how great my beer is. I feel like a lot of people lie about that. But the fact that this is a blind survey, they don't care. I tell them, hey, listen, this is for science. You don't worry about it. The fact that so many people liked it, I thought was pretty telling.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to know, or I kind of would like to know why the 5 people that extremely liked the beer didn't think it was a 5 on the Munich style. I wonder what style they thought it was, that it was just an excellent example of, or maybe none. Maybe it just wasn't. It was just a fantastic beer, which is also good too.
That's where I was at too. There's no way to know, but there are going to be certain things that I've done in my process or in the recipe, particularly given that it was a short and shoddy batch, that may make it taste different than what people are used to or what they've had in the past, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, 9 of those people still rated it a 4 out of 5 as a decent representation of the style. So Nothing I'm getting upset about, I'll tell you that. Well, overall, I was quite pleased with this. It seemed like the tasters were pretty pleased with this. Cade, are you judging me now, man?
I just want some of your Munich Dunkel at this point.
Well, if you got 2 hours, you can make a batch because it wasn't that difficult, I'll tell you. 2 hours and something to hold that fermentation vessel at 66 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
I loved it too. And I've over and over and over again, in no way am I trying to convince people to brew this way. I just think that it's interesting information out there to see what you can get away with. I'm just constantly surprised with how well these beers tend to turn out. So, well, we've got some reader comments to get to here. Urca, ERCA, says, chamber controlled to 66 degrees Fahrenheit or the fermentation vessel? Where's the temp probe? Back then, I kept my temp probe secured to the side of my fermentation vessel. So it actually did control, or arguably controlled the temperature of the beer. Really, what it did is it controlled the temperature of the outside of my stainless fermentation vessel. But yeah, that's what I did. I've done comparisons of, I'll take beer samples and measure the temp of that. I've never been more than about 1 degree Fahrenheit or about a half a degree Celsius off from the outside of the firm vessel and the actual beer temp. So it's a pretty reliable way to do that. I don't know if you do things differently.
No, that's how I used to do it when I was in Carboys. Now I've got the SS brew buckets that have the thermal well in it. So I just stick the temperature probe inside the thermal well. So it's getting, theoretically at least, the temperature inside of the beer. But like you, I don't know that it makes all that much of a difference if it's secured to the outside versus the inside. Now, when I secured to the outside, I did use like insulated tape, right? So so that way it's not just open and exposed to the fermentation chamber air.
Yeah, I do the same thing. Some form of insulation, whether that's a piece of cardboard or I think I had some bubble wrap on mine last time. So that's the way I was doing it, Urca. Siddig says, you have an efficiency of 63%, which seems not great. Is that figure low because 13.5 pounds of grain only got to 1055 OG? If you used a couple pounds less grain but did a full 60-minute mash and 60-minute boil, would you expect to get the same OG? I guess my question is, does short and shoddy require more grain and expect lower efficiency? My very, very simple response to that, Siddig, is yeah. In my experience, and I've done, almost 50 batches of short and shoddy overall, I believe. In my experience doing that, when you mash for 30 minutes or less, between 20 and 30 minutes, and then you boil for 25 minutes or so, you expect less efficiency. And it's not, to me, 63% not that bad. I mean, it's not anything I'd worry about. I mean, I know people who were getting 55% way back in the day and who just settled on that because the difference in, they could either spend a lot more money upgrading their system to get, 70% efficiency, or they could spend 75 cents more in grain to get them to the OG they want. This doesn't bother me at all. When my regular efficiency on no sparge brew in a bag is around 70% to get 63%, cutting out nearly an hour of my brew day, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, 63% for a commercial brewer is going to be pretty terrible, right?
Sure,
I mean, that's not something you want to do. But for a home brewer that's just brewing 5 gallons that can easily make adjustments to that, we've done a show, you and I have, Marshall, on efficiency and whether or not it's something that you should even focus on as a home brewer. So I'd kind of encourage listeners to go back and listen to that show if you haven't already. But then my last comment about this is, sure, okay, 63%. If you did a lower, fewer grains, but a longer mash and a longer boil, would you get a higher efficiency? I mean, the answer to that is yes, but how much, right? Yeah. And I think that's the question.
Yeah, in my experience, it's 6 to 7% more. That's all it is. Which is, to me, I still brew normal batches of beer. I do this for the series, this crazy stuff. But I'm learning that it's really not as crazy as I used to think it was, and it produces great beer. So, final question comes from Mike, or final comment. He says, curious as to why you chose Global over Harvest. I'm sure both would do excellent in this style. Maybe I'm overthinking it, and it's probably just what you had on hand at the time.
Mike. Me too. I'm curious why he chose Global over Harvest.
It is what I had on hand at the time, though I did also have a pouch of Harvest in the fridge. I just felt like using the Global. I think the Global might have been a couple, 2-3 weeks older than the Harvest, the date on it. And so again, in keeping with short and shoddy, the whole approach, I went with the older yeast and pitched it direct and didn't build up a yeast starter. And I like Global. I think it's a great strain. It's very clean. It's very reliable. It's known to be quite robust. It's one of the first yeast strains that people were talking about being able to ferment, a little bit warmer with, and we've taken it to the extreme and shown that it can still produce a very, very clean beer.
Yeah, Global's a great yeast. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using Global in a Munich Dunkel. So I would just say, my preference has generally been Harvest just because I like what it adds. And so I appreciate, Mike, for you asking this question of Marshall, why if he had Harvest on hand, he didn't use it. But again, there is nothing that's going to go wrong with Global. I have heard people say Global is a little powdery, that it has some trouble, falling out of solution fully, which may be an issue if you're looking for those ruby highlights. But again, the beer that Marshall brewed using Global looks fantastic and apparently tasted fantastic as well. So
yeah, I liked it. And the only thing I didn't have on hand was a little Urkel, or I probably would have used that. But all of those strains are gonna kick ass in this style of beer. So, well, Cade, I think that about covers Munich Dunkel. Anything else before we finish up?
No, I'm gonna go grab a beer for sure.
I wish I had some Munich Dunkel on tap, but unfortunately I don't at this point. But I will be making some soon, I'm sure. All right, Cade, I think that about covers Munich Dunkel. Anything else before we finish up?
I'm going to go grab a Munich Dunkel to drink. Hey, everybody, be sure to check out the Brew Lab. The first episodes have dropped. I hope you're enjoying it. Subscribe, listen to it, shoot me some feedback, and if you've got any ideas for shows to get on, let me know. Cade@brewlosophy.com.
I'm absolutely enjoying it. That first episode that we dropped was phenomenally good, I thought, and the feedback has been great as well. So yeah, go check it out. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy Munich Dunkel. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.